What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Mighty Brad's podcast. Today, I got my buddy George on.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
Of course. George is a Catholic missionary, and I want to start off by asking you a simple but complex question that not a lot of us really think about that often. Because of what you believe in the afterlife, heaven and hell, are you afraid of dying?
You know, Brad, I think it's a really good question because, like, so much of our life, we're thinking about preventing death, and we really can see this in our culture and in America where we are. Like, that's definitely prevalent of you need to keep your health up, use this product, take this product to keep yourself young,
Right.
and to avoid death. But with the Catholic understanding of death, it's actually a way where we are able to go and be united with God. If we've lived our life in such a way that we've chosen that. And so, to quote St. Paul, it's like, for me to live is for Christ, but to die is gain. And what he means by that is, for him to live is just because God wants him to live, Jesus Christ wants him to live, so that he might serve his people. But for Paul to die, for any one of us to die, especially those of us who are waiting to be with our Lord, it's actually gain, because then we get to be in union with Christ. So, in a lot of ways, in my humanness, I am scared of death, and I definitely am cautious, and I try not to do rash things.
Right.
But at the same time, I have a great desire for what death means, which is eternal joy with the Lord.
Right. So being human, you're afraid of dying in a sense, but at the same time, you're in a sense excited to see what comes with, quote unquote, what we call death and after.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So mainly, I mean, of course, what most Catholics and religious Christians believe is in heaven and hell. So, Can you explain to me a little bit of the gist of how all that works?
How heaven and hell and all that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's really good to begin with the understanding of what heaven and hell are. Heaven is eternity with God. So then the opposite of that, hell, which is eternity without God. And then in Catholic theology, there's also this understanding of kind of like a middle ground, which is called Purgatory. And there's some scriptural basis for that, but basically Purgatory is where we are waiting to cleanse ourselves so that we can be in the presence of the Lord in heaven. So when you die, you either go straight to heaven, which is very few people would do that. Only those who have lived a life basically without sin, which is really none of us. And then everyone else they've lived a life where they've chosen to be with the Lord. And the reason I say that is I'm sure you have encountered, there are people who just live a very evil life, or even just a life that says, I don't believe in God, or I don't want to do what Christ teaches, and so therefore I choose to live my life without God. But for those who have been striving to, it doesn't mean you have to do it perfectly, but for those who are striving to be with God, they've still made a lot of mistakes. Right. And so Purgatory is a time to cleanse yourself and make yourself new, so that you can be in the glory of the Lord and not be ashamed because of your dirtiness, kind of thing.
Is there, I'm not sure if you know the answer, but I'm just going to ask, is in that Purgatory phase, so that's like a middle ground before you're either in heaven or hell?
It's a middle ground to be into heaven.
Okay.
Yeah, you won't go to Purgatory unless you're going to go to heaven.
Okay. Is there a certain time that you're in that for?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I will say that it's time is something that exists on earth, but God exists out of time. And so therefore, there's not really a set
Okay.
time that you have to be there.
Okay. Yeah, I think the concept of eternity is such a crazy thing to think about, because we live our entire lives based on time. We have to be here to work at this time, go to class at this time. And so, but after you die, it's from these beliefs, there is no time, essentially.
Yeah, there isn't it's eternity,
Right.
which is just we can't. Yeah,
You,
it's hard to
the whole human
imagine.
mind can't really. It's difficult to imagine something like that. So tell me a little bit about the hell aspect of. So of course, if you commit sins, etc., bad things, then you're more likely to go there. How does that process work in comparison? Or not comparison, in contrast to the heaven?
Yeah. You're getting these are some really good questions, and for those who are listening, or even for you, there's a book called Dante's Inferno.
I've heard of that.
And yes, it's a book about, I can't remember the author right now, but it's a book about his understanding of hell. It's believed guided by the Holy Spirit, but it's his writings on what hell would be like. But and your question was. Kind of what's the difference between heaven and hell a little bit?
Yeah, and the process of whether you go to heaven or hell, and what hell would look like.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's first important to note that you and I and the Catholic Church, no one can say whether someone is going to heaven or hell. We can't ever judge that. It's up to God. But very simply put, and this is all I will say specifically on that, is if you live a life that chooses to be away from God and or like you don't want you say I don't want what is being offered to me, then you've made your choice, and there's a lot there of like you didn't know about Christianity or things like that, and there are it's not a hard and fast rule. There's a lot of black and white there, there's a lot of gray, I should say. But what hell is like, I should say. Is that it's really just an eternity without God, and there's great suffering there because one, you realize that you've chosen it, and while we're on earth, even the worst person is still in the presence of God in some way. And so you don't really have that realization that you are away from Him until you are in hell. And it's, this is where I'm going to be for eternity. Hell doesn't have to be like torture. Mm-hmm. It's worse. It's just bad enough to realize that your hope is lost to ever be with God. Right. Because you're eternally separated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, that's a very clear explanation. So I want to move on a little bit, and so you told me you grew up in a Catholic household, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about your parents' beliefs and how they instilled that into you, and just essentially what growing up was like with the religion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I grew up Catholic. Was baptized when I was an infant, and my dad he went to seminary to be a priest, and while he was in seminary, he met my mom, she's an artist, so she was working on the murals in the church where he would go to mass, and was connected to the rest of it was a monastery of Benedictine monks, and so he met her, and through a friendship discerned that he no longer wanted to be a priest, because Catholic priests are celibate, meaning that they don't get married. And so he then decided to marry my mother, and so I bring that up to say I grew up in a household that was we were very committed to the faith in a lot of ways. Like my dad had a very good understanding of the Catholic Church. My mother is a convert. She grew up not really sure if she was grew up Christian or what, but she eventually converted to the Catholic faith before she met my dad. And so growing up in the Catholic Church, I would go to daily mass with my dad, who's a frequent daily mass goer. So we have not just Sunday mass, but there's an opportunity to worship the Lord in this specific way of mass every day. And so I would go on the weekends with him when I didn't have school. He would motivate me by saying he would buy me Chick-fil-A afterwards when I was a little kid. So I was like 8-year-old George is like walking up like, all right, I'm ready for Chick-fil-A, and oh yeah, I'll be at mass. And so like that's how my understanding of God and a Catholic Church was. It wasn't very strong. It was like the childlike faith of, I believe God's real, but I'm not necessarily ready to devote my life to him because I don't understand him, and I'm here to satisfy my belly. I'm here for the Chick-fil-A. It was a lot of times as a kid, and it wasn't until high school where I started being confronted with that question of, do I want to be Catholic, and continue to experience that question through college. And I would say like you always get. There's always the question in your mind of, do I want to be Catholic, or do I want to continue to worship the Lord in this way, in this denomination of Christianity, or do I have it wrong? Which is a really, I think that's just an incredibly human thing to question, and it's definitely not wrong. We're having this podcast because we're curious and we want to know things and we want to explore that. And so, so growing up as a Catholic, I had the desire to be Catholic, and I truly believed then, and I believe even more so now, that the Catholic faith is the best way to reach the Lord and to be in heaven. And there's so much more to the Catholic faith than that, but to sum it up very shortly, like, I knew that I wanted that, and I was pretty sure that the Catholic faith was the way to do that. But I definitely had my struggles in college and in high school, and a desire to live a certain way, but not fulfilling that well because of my brokenness, because of my humanness. And just to kind of move into your next question, Brad, about how I became a missionary, is that I came to a point living in, you could say a lot of sin, but for those who maybe wouldn't recognize that, I was just living in a lot of unhappiness because I was doing things that in the moment there was pleasure, and in the moment I thought that's what I desired, and then after I experienced whatever it was, it felt like there was less there. And I would love to hear, like, have you experienced that before as well? And what's been your experience like?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's a lot of things that you can research and listen to other people about and get their feelings on what their experience was like. But I think there's some things in life that you can't truly understand how you feel about it unless you actually experience it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I don't know, for example, let's say hookup culture, right? You can, if you haven't partaken in it at all, you can have your views and you can see what's going on and stuff, but if you haven't tried it, and not recommending it, but if you haven't tried it, sometimes you can't think to yourself, okay, this is how I feel about it because I have experience with it, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Sure.
So yeah, just stuff like that I feel as though some things you just have to experience for yourself, and then you either realize, okay, depending on what it is in life, okay, I think this is right for me, I do enjoy this, and it is meaningful, or I feel like I'm just wasting my time, this isn't purposeful, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very true. And to add to that, because my view is a little different in that, so we have to experience it in some way. And so that experience could be a personal experience, or we actually do that action, whatever we're talking about. But we can also learn from the wisdom of others who have already experienced that. Because, like, a very extreme example, say like I have a family member and they watched their friend, I don't know, they jumped off a cliff into water thinking it was fine, and then they hit rocks and they like broke a leg, and so now I didn't experience that, but they did. They watched it happen, and so now they can come to me as, say, like it's my grandfather, and they say, hey, George, if you ever decide to go cliff jumping, that's a big thing back home. We'll jump off of cliffs into the lakes and stuff like that. He can say to me, hey, before you ever jump off of a cliff into water, like check and make sure there's not rocks there. And so I didn't have to experience that in order to like know that I don't want to hit the rocks.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful because the Catholic Church has thousands of years of wisdom, and so that's why, well, people might say, well, like you need to experience everything, and I think to your point, there's a lot that we do need to experience. But if you have trust in a family member, or in my case, like I have trust in what the Catholic Church teaches, and so I can say, okay, you're telling me that I shouldn't do this, and you have reasons why I shouldn't do this. I'm gonna trust that because I don't want to deal with the brokenness that comes, or like the pain that comes with doing this action. And so that's why there's a lot of wisdom in that, and just like learning how to like go through experiences. And I'm kind of lost. I don't remember what our original question we were answering was.
No, it was you originally got into how to you became a missionary.
Yeah.
But to your point that you were just explaining, that you having said that, I agree that there are some things that you can look from people in the past, and people that you trust saying certain things. Obviously with the cliff jumping thing, you know, if someone's experienced that, it's like, yeah, okay, that could happen to me, so there's no point in me going to a place where there might very well maybe a rock at the bottom and I jumped in just to see, like.
Yeah.
But so to backtrack a little bit, in your like teenage and high school years, was there, well, to preface that even before asking this question, where you grew up, were there a lot of religious people? Was it like a common to be Catholic and Christian?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Knoxville, Tennessee area, and there's not a lot of Catholics, but there are a lot of Christians. It's part of the Bible Belt, and so you have a lot of Protestants, like Baptists and Methodists. A lot of non-denominational is very popular, and so I grew up with a lot of Christians, but not a lot of Catholics. It's a very low percentage of Catholics in that area, mainly because it's dominated by so many other Christian denominations, which, you know, it was sometimes a struggle because the Catholic Church is very misunderstood by Protestants. There's a great history there of tension, and so I would get a lot of questions about why do you believe these certain things, and I remember I would get those questions, and especially as a high schooler, I'm like, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure that I believe in this. I'm like, okay, what do we believe? What do I believe? And so I would ask a teacher, like one of my like Sunday school teachers, or we call them catechists, because the catechism is what holds all the Catholic teachings. And so I would ask them, or I would try to do my own research, and then a lot of times I would kind of forget who asked me, and I don't know who I was supposed to give the answer to, but I have the answer now. I know what it is. So it was definitely interesting growing up in that area.
Yeah, I would think if there are Catholics, but there's predominantly Christians, and you have some different beliefs. If there's a lot of people who have somewhat different beliefs than you, and they're asking you questions, like as a high school, you have like this pressure to feel as like you need to know the answer, and it's like why you guys why are you guys like asking me this? I'm not 100% sure, etc., etc. But yeah, and so for the missionary aspect, so you were saying how throughout high school and college you were like questioning, do you want to fully commit to this? I want to know the answers, etc. So what like really pushed you to really want to take that path?
It's a really good question, and I'll elaborate on this, but to sum it up, I hit rock bottom. And what that looked like for me was I became involved, like the school that I was at, I became involved with the party culture, and I wasn't in the healthiest of relationships. And I was in a place that I realized, like I was talking about earlier, I was chasing things, and then I would get them, and like, that didn't fulfill me. And I got to a point where life wasn't very fun, and it didn't have the joy that I thought it should, and that I had experienced in my life when I was a little kid and like growing up. And so, who I turned to was a Catholic priest. He was the chaplain for the university, and I just started talking to him about, and I went to him for confession very specifically, and that is a sacrament of the Catholic Church where the priest is acting in the person of Christ, and he listens to my sins, and God forgives me. But it's like a physical. I get to talk to him. To this priest is it's like a physical representation of what spiritually is happening, which is the forgiveness of sins. Mm-hmm. And so I came to him and I was talking about that, all the things that I was struggling with, and he invited me in a spiritual direction, and what that is, very simply, and other people would probably add things to this definition, but put very simply, a spiritual director helps guide you in your prayer life. And like when I go and I sit with the Lord and I try to talk with him, and what I receive, what I don't receive, like how to do it better, that's what a spiritual director is for. He can give you advice. He's a mentor in a lot of ways for like actual life, and then for this, or I should say like physical life, but then also spiritual life. Yeah. And so I came to him and I'm telling him all these things that I'm struggling with, and he said, like, yeah. I should say he didn't like. There wasn't like a one-liner, but he was like, all right, these are the things you need to start trying to do, and he was there to listen to me. And every time I like messed up, I'm like, hey, Father, and we call our priests Father. That's like their title, like you might say Reverend or anything like that. So I said, Father, that's really hard. Like all of these things you're telling me to do, but I wanted to do them, and every time that I come to them and like, yeah, I messed up, it's like, all right, I can keep trying. It won't be fixed in one day.
Yeah. Now, of course, I'm not a very religious person, but I like to study different religions and gain my own point of view and beliefs. But and what you just said about it, like him saying all these things, and like that's kind of hard. But I find that, to relate to you, a lot of things in life, it's better to take the harder way. Usually the easier way may be easier to get there, but it's ultimately not as satisfactory. And usually the goals and the places at the end of the hard road is much more fulfilling than the easy road. Because it's like, all right, I could just go down here and nothing. I'm fine. Just keep walking.
No one stops you.
But down the hard road, you got people throwing stuff at you. You got roadblocks in front of you. You got to go around. You got to figure things out. And I think most of the time taking the more difficult path in life is going to be better overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And the easy path is what took me to rock bottom. That path just kept leading down and winding down until eventually I got to a point where I was like, this hole only gets deeper if I keep digging, and I need to stop digging. Yeah. And so so I started on this path that is hard, and it sometimes I like to think about, or I think about, like, why is it so hard? Why is that path? Why is you might say the path of righteousness or the path of being a morally and ethically good person? Why is it difficult? And I think part of the reason is that people around us aren't living that way. And they might desire it, but they don't seem to be very committed to it. And so that's only one part of it. Like, we're not only a product of what's around us. There's also like the internal, how we're forming ourselves, but it's hard, and not everyone understands. And that was definitely my situation as I was learning more about the Catholic Church and really having a reconversion, is that the world, and I say that to mean like past friendships and relationships, and that the party culture, it was still pulling me in. That everyone wanted my time in so many ways, and so I'm like, yeah. So I start really trying to clean up my life, and one of the things that our chaplain invited me to was a retreat called Awakening, and I went to this retreat and had an average experience, I would say. There were talks about virtue and about God, and there was time for prayer, and I experienced all those things, and they were nice. But I think that what really stood out to me was the community that I finally met there, because I didn't have one that I felt what truly cared about me. And so when I encountered that, I thought, yes, like I want to be around these people, because I feel that they actually deeply love me. And funny enough, that was about the time that COVID became, like, for the first time, like, we're like figuring it out. We don't know what's happening, and I was at the end of my sophomore year, and so they sent us all home after spring break. And so that was a time where it was very pivotal, and COVID was a very confusing and very difficult time, but for me at that moment, it was a blessing. And it was a blessing because all of the worldly things that I was a part of were just gone. And so there aren't any parties to be invited to anymore. And that relationship that I was in, she's very far away in like another state. And so I had all of these chains that were around my heart were broken. And so I have this openness, and I'm still going to spiritual direction with our chaplain over the phone, talking with him and getting his advice. And in talking to him, he invited me to help play a leadership role in the next Awakening retreat. And what he invited me to be a part of is called Passion Narrative, which, put very simply, you have the gospel about Jesus Christ, and students would act through it, kind of like a play, but more prayerful than that. And there wasn't talking. It was acted silently with music, and so you got to really sit with a simple portrayal of Jesus being born, healing people, suffering, like the scourging, being crucified, and also being resurrected, and it's a very powerful thing to watch, especially if you have a deep connection with the story of Christianity. And so I was invited to portray Jesus in this Awakening retreat, and at the time when he asked me to do this, I said, I can't. Like, the way that I've been living my life is not worthy of trying to portray Jesus to these people. This is important, and in recognizing that, I think I really showed him that I wanted to do this well. If he convinced me to say yes, which he did, and so he convinced me in his. He was like a father to me in a lot of ways, and so he convinced me with this like understanding of, this is for your good, George. And so I said yes, and the way that you prepare for this narrative is by praying with Scripture. And at the time, I didn't really have much of a prayer life. I didn't have a relationship with Christ. I didn't have a relationship with God, my Creator. And so I began to pray with Scripture and trying to ask questions like, what was Christ thinking? What was he feeling? What was he doing? How was he loving? And that was a very powerful experience for me, was the realization of in every one of these situations, God's just loving the people that are around him. And I really want to portray that well. I want to portray the love that is Christ. And so I went into this this retreat, and I portrayed Jesus, all with this kind of like continually meditating, you might say, on the love of Christ. And I remember being in the scene of the agony of the garden. And for those who aren't familiar with the passage, he's about to be abandoned by his apostles, by his followers, and taken by the Pharisees, like scribes and lawyers, or like the higher ups of Jewish culture, to be crucified. And so that's the kind of setting that Christ is in this part of the story. So I'm in that, and I'm trying to understand what it was to be like to be betrayed, to realize you're being handed over to be crucified, and you understand that there's death, and I just started weeping in the middle of this narrative, because what I had prayed to understand was, what was the pain, what he was feeling. And in the Catholic understanding, he felt the weight of the world. Like, he felt all of the sin of the world on his shoulders, and he wept in pain for all of those people. And so I'm trying to like understand this in what way that I can. And what I felt was the pain of my own sins and my own failings, and how, like, the grief that I was causing our Lord, but also his hand just reaching out and saying, I've forgiven you, and I've forgotten it. You're already forgiven. I died on the cross for you, but you need to choose me. And as we talked about earlier about heaven or hell, you have to choose God in order, and then he will make you worthy, and then he will give you the graces to do that. But you have to say, I want God to be the center of my life. I want to live a life that is trying to be worthy of him, even though I will never be perfect. And so in that moment, as I left this retreat very deeply moved, because I just had such a powerful encounter with the Holy Spirit of just, there was no way for me to refute the fact that the Lord was present in that moment. And I remember doing a lot of prayer, and eventually I came to this realization that I wanted to give my life to the Lord, and I wanted to spread this love that I had just received so powerfully. I wanted to love other people in this way. And Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, is an organization that does that. They send missionaries to college campuses to be doing what I'm doing now. And so that's how I was led to this realization of, I want to tell people about the love that is Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I really felt that when you were explaining the story. And I mean, not in that exact sense, but I think a lot of us can relate to going on a certain path in life and then hitting rock bottom and just being like, what am I doing? And then having something or someone pull us back out, or maybe even ourselves, and realizing that we have to take a different path to make things better. So, I mean, having said that, I'm going to move on a little bit, and I want to talk about essentially what a Catholic relationship is like. Because you're in one now. How long have you and your girlfriend been together?
We've been together for about a year and 9 months.
Okay. So, can you explain essentially what... Now, of course, there's going to be similarities to just a regular relationship, if I say it like that.
Mm-hmm.
But are there, like, what are the core, like, foundations of you guys both being really religious and then being in a relationship together? What's, like, the foundation?
The foundation of our relationship is definitely God, and I think that it has to be, because we're both only people, and so I can't fulfill all of her desires, and she can't fulfill all of mine. And so the person who has to be at the center of our relationship has to be God, because He's the one who fulfills all of these desires for love and unity and communion. And so that really is it's the basis of our relationship, because it's where our whole life flows from. She's a music director at a church, and so she plays music for the youth and also for the masses that they have on Sundays. And me being a missionary, my life is very in a very tangible way dedicated to service of Christ. And so it's like where we live our lives from, and what helps us stay grounded in not trying to find all my purpose in a relationship with another person.
Okay. So in the relationship, is there, like, do you guys do prayers together and go to church together and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. When we can, yeah. We live.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we live about 4 hours apart, but especially when we were in college together, which I met her around the same time that I started becoming more involved in the Catholic Center and went on this retreat that I was talking to you about. And we would go to Mass as often as we could together, and so whenever we call about once a week for a couple hours, and we always end the call with prayer. And it's really wonderful to do that, because we're continually inviting Him into our relationship, and surrendering our worries about our relationship to Him. There's a lot of unknowns, especially with long distance, and hoping to be engaged in the next year or so of, okay, how's this going to work? I don't know. But if we both can trust God and surrender that, then eventually, if we prudently try to make decisions about it, it will take care of itself, however the Lord decides to will it.
Yeah. And I also know, part of the religion is being celibate, like before marriage. There's no sex before marriage, right? Is from your personal experience, is that something that is difficult or not that difficult, or
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. It definitely can be difficult, because we're all created for love and union with someone of the opposite sex, and so it's definitely something that you have to take steps to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And you first, you were saying, I don't know if celibate's the right word.
Okay.
Since it's not a for life type of celibacy.
Okay.
But it is, I think, a great word for it is living chastity, living chastely. And what that word really means is being in love. We're respecting each other. We're not lusting. We're not using each other for gain. And so that's what I was talking about just a little bit ago. God has to be the center of our relationship, because if God wasn't the center of our relationship, then I'm lusting after whatever she can give me. Yeah. And so that ties right into, is chastity, is having boundaries, is waiting for sex before marriage. Is that difficult? And in some ways, yes. In some ways, not at all. It's actually beautiful, because I get to find new ways to love her that isn't physical.
Yeah.
And just finding her, we think about love languages, like affirmations and acts of service. That's a really big one for her. If there's something that I can do for her, whether it be take out the trash, or to go pick her up from the airport, or something like that, doing things like that is a very tangible way to say I love you, without the physical intimacy that is reserved for marriage, and particularly reserved for marriage because it's the ultimate act of gift of self, and that should be reserved for one person. And marriage is a complete bonding of man to woman and becoming one flesh, and so you only do that once. And so in the Catholic Church, divorce really doesn't exist, or at least like some people in the Catholic Church might become divorced, but that's not something that the Catholic Church endorses.
Right. You explaining all of that and explaining finding other ways to love her aside from that. You having said that, I think that's such a beautiful thing and a beautiful way to look at it, because I think a lot of people, especially, of course, the beginning of college and especially in high school, a lot of people are in relationships mainly for purposes of lust, because they want to do sexual things with other people. And I'm thinking about it, when you refrain from something like that, you can truly figure out that you love a person fully, and you don't like or love them just for that purpose. So taking that away, you can find out, oh, I love these qualities about this person. You can, like, there's a whole different, that's just a whole different, I don't know the word for it, a whole different platform, a whole different ball game.
Yeah, it's a whole different view than what so much of our culture talks about now. The hookup culture, as you said, very prevalent, and I think part of the reason it's prevalent is because we're made for, in some sense, you might say we are made for a sexual relationship. We're made for intimacy, but when we don't do it in the way that God has created it, has ordered it, it's all taking and it's really no giving, because love isn't just a feeling, it's a commitment, and that's what marriage helps make so tangible. Is that it's not that I'm having all of these feelings of desire for another person, so I'm going to act on it, and that's love, and that's okay. The Catholic Church doesn't believe that. There needs to be a commitment there, and there's that intimacy is reserved for a great, like the ultimate commitment, which is marriage, and even in that, so many people are looking to satisfy a very human desire for union and love, which we all need, but that's really only given by God in its most ultimate purpose.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, in our culture, it's like, what can you give me sexually? And it's how can you help me please myself, instead of how can we be in union and maybe without that aspect, and build a foundation and a relationship together, and then that comes in later in life. So I think that's a really good way to look at it. So I something that we might have touched on a little bit before, but not much, is, the times where you really questioned if you believed in God, if you believed in the path that you're going down now. I know you were saying before how in high school and college you were kind of lost with that, but even sometimes aside from that, like even now or times preceding now, after college or after high school, were there times or a time when you were like, do I really believe in this? Is this what my life is for?
Pretty regularly, and I think I think it's a very natural question to ask yourself. I think that first time that I ever had that thought was, I was probably in middle school, and I remember laying in my bed thinking, like, okay, I'm like 10, or I don't remember how old I was, and if I were to die, like what's it going to be like? Like, am I going to be like looking down on everyone and seeing what they're doing, and is what I understand about heaven and hell, is it real? All of that, and up until now, where I have this thought of, what if all of this is for nothing? What if all of this is just me like running in circles and actually means nothing? And I have those thoughts, and not incredibly often, but definitely there's a frequency to them, and I think that that is a lie from the devil. That's a lie from Satan, that what I'm doing has no purpose. Because what I am doing, like as a missionary, gives me a lot of joy. I have a lot of purpose. While there is suffering, there's a lot of meaning and a love that I receive in that. And even when I'm struggling and I don't receive that love, there's a hope that it's for a certain reason, because I can never really know.
Yeah.
Until I die, whether that's actually, like, everything that I was in was for naught.
Mm-hmm.
But a very simple argument to think about is, what if it is all real? Then everything that I'm doing is very important. And if it's not real, then oh well, because then there aren't any, like, from a very simple understanding, if there's just nothing after we die, then did it matter what I did really anyway? But I truly believe that there is a reason for it, and I think that there are I was going to say evil beings, but basically Satan, who wants me to think differently, because what I'm doing is affecting lives so importantly. Yeah. There are many students, there are many people who need to hear the good news of the gospel, because otherwise they've hit rock bottom and they don't know where's up. And so it's to circle back to the question of, did I doubt, and do I doubt? Absolutely. And I think we all doubt, but there's like a faith that we need, and as I go along and I have those doubts and I bring them to God in prayer, and I'm like, what if I'm doing this for nothing? And sometimes He's very silent, and sometimes there's this reassuring of, look at all of the small miracles that I've done in your life. All of these good things, I've given you them, and sometimes the logic doesn't explain why I am where I am, and I haven't tragically died, or I'm not still spiraling down like I was. In those moments when I can reflect and be grateful for that, I realize this only makes sense if God's real.
Yeah. Something that this always comes up when I'm having conversations with people. It's the very simple question of what if. I think a lot of us can, of course, we have doubts about a lot of things that we believe in. It's in the sense of, yeah, is this real? Do I really believe in this? And I think the human mind has a tendency, especially nowadays, to look at things on the negative side. Look at, oh, what if this is for nothing? What if there is no purpose to this? This bad thing could happen. But you have to ask your question of, what if? What if this is all worth it? You have to look at the positive aspect of it. I think we so regularly nowadays, as a society, look at things on the negative side, and we come up with the 100 reasons as to why this could go wrong, why this isn't real, and then we never even think to look at the. Now I know this isn't exactly your situation, but in society, I think we never really. We look at the 100 bad things, but then the 1 or 2 things that might be good. But in reality, there are so many more good things. It's just we're not looking at that, but we should.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. So I want to move on a little bit, and we don't have much time left, but on the aspect of kind of masculinity and how it relates to your religion, and masculinity along with purpose, and how do you remember the talk that we were watching about on YouTube? Do you remember what his name was?
I believe. You know what? I'm not sure. There's a few names it could be, but I'm not sure who it is.
Because I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I remember him talking about masculinity. He was, of course, religious, and talking about masculinity and purpose, and also the fact that happiness isn't always 100% 24/7 aligned with the purpose or the what you have to do as a man. It's like there's going to be hard times. You're not always going to be happy, but this is purposeful, so you should do it anyway.
Yeah, I think what he was really speaking into was as men, there is this desire to give your life to something, and I'm interested if you've felt the same way, but there's a desire of I want to devote my life to something that actually has meaning. And would you agree with that?
100%. It's something that crosses my mind every single day.
Yeah, and it's not reserved for men. I think women definitely can feel this, but in some ways, you could say that the desire is stronger sometimes in our masculine, just the way that we are created. Yeah. That there's a desire to give yourself to something and a purpose, and it's really. It makes a lot of sense in the Christian faith because Christ died for us, and he coming down to earth as a male in a desire to give himself for the world and forgive their sins, he dies for us. And so each one of us as men are called to give ourselves to something, and the ultimate thing that we could give ourselves to and die for is our friends and for God ultimately. At least that's my belief. And so, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
About which aspect?
About like wanting to give yourself for your friends, and like how do you feel about this, like the great devotion to God? How does that, in your own mind, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think doing things that are of service to other people is always going to get you farther too. And I also, something that I realize in my personal life and that I tell people sometimes you can't always help other people until you help yourself. Because if you're in a really dark place and everything about life sucks, it's not easy. It's not easy for you to get up in the morning and do normal everyday activities for yourself, so it's going to be even more difficult to try and serve other people. But once you can get yourself together and learn this and this and this and the skills for this, you can apply that to your life and then share that with other people. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, experiences, and like you can learn things from other people, and it might not necessarily, you might not have necessarily experienced that exact thing, but you can understand it when someone is talking about it and explaining it to you, and then you can be like, oh, I can apply that to my life. And yeah, I mean, I just imagine just being able to give back to my friends who have done so much for me, and my family that's always been there for me and literally gave me life. If I can, I think about, for example, making a lot of money, not exactly for myself so I can buy a nice car, this and that, but one of the reasons is to travel, because I really want to travel all around the world. But also, it's I think about, what if I can? My parents are 60 something, and I'm not living with them. I'm doing my own thing, right? And I just call them up. I'm like, hey, Mom and Dad, you're going on vacation next week, and then I can just send them wherever they want to go, do this and that, and that's just a beautiful thought in my mind, and to be able to do that for my family, because I mean, ultimately, there's nothing I can do to really repay them for what they've done,
right?
But that can be an aspect of trying to do that. We're about out of time, unfortunately, but George, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that it's an important little disclaimer to say that while I'm Catholic and I'm a focused missionary, I'm also human, and I don't have all of the correct answers or understandings to what the Catholic Church teaches or focus. So in this interview, what I say does not represent what Focus has to say or what the Catholic Church says, particularly because I'm not a spokesperson for them.
Right. Well, again, Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.
And we'll catch you guys on the next one.